All right. Good morning. Good morning, all. Appreciate you joining us this morning early to talk about CMMC. We're happy to have you this morning. I hope everyone's summer is going well so far and looking forward to having a great discussion around accelerating time to compliance for CMMC. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. My name is Jeff Hay. I'm an account executive in the risk practice for Sikich, specifically focused on cybersecurity and compliance. We also have with us Matt, who is with Align, our partner. And Matt is the director of federal sales, working with clients on CMMC, FedRAMP, and more. He has a deep understanding of the federal landscape and assists organizations in navigating essential assessment services, including FedRAMP, CMMC, FISMA, and others. So thanks, Matt, for joining us this morning. Ken is the principal in charge of cybersecurity under Sikich's risk practice. Ken has a military background in the United States Marine Corps and understands the importance of the security of the defense industrial base. His primary focus at Sikich includes enterprise risk management, VCSO services, and helping organizations comply with CMMC, PCI, ISO, and the other alphabet soup of acronyms that we have for compliance. Make sure, if you don't already, to follow Ken and Matt on LinkedIn. They provide a lot of great content around compliance, around audits, assessments, and all things compliance. So definitely follow each on LinkedIn, and you'll get a lot of good content there. They're always posting great things. So as we kind of move forward and think about the compliance landscape and, this accelerating time to compliance, why it matters to kind of get things done in a short time frame. Matt, maybe you could share with us the latest CMMC enforcement timeline updates and what our attendees should be thinking about and aware of.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everybody. Excuse me. Thank you all so much for attending. Excited to talk through this. So yeah, I think this is a really good place to start. Kind of where is CMMC? Everybody that's been following it, whether you've been following it loosely or very closely, you probably have a good understanding that it's been, I don't know, I guess you'd say a little bit of a roller coaster in terms of CMMC is coming, maybe it's not, it's coming. And it leads to, I think, a lot of confusion in the market when they hear now a lot of people more than ever saying, hey, CMMC is right around the corner in terms of it being a requirement. I think it was a little bit of the boy who cried wolf. I think people are kind of hearing that and going, okay, maybe I've heard this before. So I want to talk through a little bit the landscape, where we are, why this time really is different, and what is coming up in the ensuing months, and what that's going to mean for you guys. So the biggest thing to be aware of is one of the main reasons that there was a little bit of a roller coaster and there was so much uncertainty around when would CMMC be coming as a requirement for me is because it's the federal government and they have to go through a rulemaking process, and those can be very long, cumbersome, and nobody, in the public sector, commercial world can have a lot of insight into that because it's just kind of going through the red tape, rulemaking processes. There are two rules that have been very critical to the rollout and enforcement of CMMC as a requirement. The 32 CFR rule, I'm sure most people are familiar with at this point. That is the one that has already been finalized. It's been almost a year now, actually. It was at the end of December 2024 when that rule became effective. That one formalized and finalized the actual CMMC program itself. What is CMMC? What are the requirements? Who can assess? What is the rollout? All the details of the actual program. Thus, you can, and people have been getting CMMC level 2 certified all year, all through 2025. So the CMMC program is live and happening. So then what are we waiting for? The second rule, the companion rule that goes along with that, and they reference each other in the actual rules, is what's referred to as the 48 CFR rule, because that's where it shows up in the Code of Federal Regulations. This one has to do with the enforcement, you might say, of CMMC into DoD's actual contracts, right? And for them to actually require it upon award of contract. So that's why, this is the real teeth behind it, right? Anybody can go get certified today, but you may be able to continue doing your DoD business today without having to come across that requirement from the DoD. Thus, there's no teeth yet. Thus, maybe you aren't, too proactive about going and getting it. So I think the big thing to highlight here is that 48 CFR rule, it is in the final stages of that ambiguous, long federal rulemaking process. And we all anticipate that to be finalized. Again, nobody knows for sure, but definitely within 2025. It literally could be any day or week now. I think most people are saying around, if not before, October of this year. So probably sometime in the next few months, that 48 CFR will be finalized. From there, it takes 60 days until it becomes effective. And then what we've outlined here on this slide is the phased rollout. Okay, so once that rule becomes finalized, it's not like a switch gets flipped and every DoD contract has CMMC requirements at all levels in it. The DoD basically said, hey, we know that this is a new requirement for third-party validation if you handle CUI. So we're going to do a phased rollout approach so that it affects the defense industrial base less, right? So that it's not as a complete of a wave of hitting you of like, oh crap, all these requirements at once. So what we've outlined here are the 4 phases of their phased implementation of CMMC requirements, again, into DoD's contract requirements. And the first phase, and it's important to note that each of these are 12 months. That's why it says the start on effective date, and the next one says 1 year after. So the initial phase 1, again, that starts once that 48 CFR rule is effective. We would anticipate sometime later this year. The requirement, as it writes in there, it says the DoD intends to require CMMC level 1 and level 2 self-assessments as applicable. So those that would be applicable for the self-assessments at level 1 and level 2, that's when they'll start rolling those requirements out. One thing I do want to highlight in that paragraph where it talks about the phase 1, it at the very end then throws this crazy wrench into things when it says at the program manager's discretion, they may require level 2 certification from a C3PAO. So how is that actually going to play out? Nobody really knows. I'm very curious to see how that plays out because they basically said at their discretion, they could require a certification if they want. But the sort of status quo of that first year of the rollout is self-attestations for a year with that little caveat. Then from there, phase 2, again, a year later, that's when they are more formally, as a process across the board, going to be rolling out CMMC third-party assessment requirements. So again, if you handle controlled unclassified information and you're going to fall into level 2, where you would need a C3PAO to certify you, which a vast majority are, just to clarify, that's when those are going to be rolled into DoD's contracts over those next 12 months. Then from there, level 3 or phase 3, that's where they're going to start rolling out level 3 requirements. That's for like especially sensitive data. And the important thing to know here, I talked to a lot of organizations about this. Doesn't seem like everybody's aware of this. To get level 3, you need level 2 certification first, right? So if a level 3 is going to be or is a requirement for you, you're going to need to get a level 2 certification from a C3PAO first. And then the DoD actually, DIBCAT, comes in and assesses you against the Delta. They do a free assessment and get you to level 3. So again, 12 months of that. And then phase 4, from then on, that's where all levels of CMMC requirements are in applicable DoD contracts from there. So I think, again, the big takeaway here is timeline-wise, this is coming pretty soon. They have put in this phased approach to mitigate the effects on organizations that this is going to affect. But the thing I'm most curious about, and a lot of us in the industry are most curious about, is in that first 12 months, when they say you only have to self-attest, but it's possible that at their discretion, they might throw in a certification requirement. How much is that discretion actually used? So long story short, it is coming. It is coming very soon. This rollout helps kind of ease that, but it's a little bit TBD on exactly how that rollout's going to work.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And I think you made an important point there about, kind of the distinction between that level 2 self-assessment and the level 2 certification. We have a lot of clients who say, hey, I'm just going to self-assess, but as we go in and we start doing scoping of CUI, understanding what they're doing, we find out that they really fall into that CUI category where they're not going to be able to self-assess. So definitely, work with your providers to talk about that. As we kind of flip, Ken, maybe you could talk to us about how you see the risk of delayed compliance impacting small to mid-sized defense contractors? What does that look like?
Yeah, really, we've been helping clients through vCISO services and just risk management in general. And a lot of the questions we get from our clients, they'll be, calling us out that they're filling out a vendor questionnaire, right? And as part of that questionnaire, their primes are asking them, what are they doing for CMMC? How are they protecting their data? And not only that, the data sharing or connections with the primes, they're doing their due diligence beforehand, allowing these subcontractors to get access to schematics or any kind of the contract information. And part of that due diligence is asking them basically the NIST 800-171 controls, are they in place, even though you're not certified. So a lot of our clients are scrambling to kind of implement just the baseline controls so they can do work for the primes, because the primes are already pushing this compliance, and they're already doing their self due diligence on the supply chain that they're working with, even though the certification part or requirement is not out there. So what we're seeing, what's delaying a lot of the contracts and work for our small businesses and mid-sized businesses in the DIB, is that ability to work with primes and kind of pass their security checks before they enroll them into the work that they need them to do. So that's delaying contractual work. So really, it's just being that proactive, putting these things in place to start working with your partners in the DIB that see this coming, down the road. So it's nice to see the DIB actively self kind of regulating and putting these vendor management programs in place until it becomes actually a regulation.
Yeah, that is a really good point to bring up. I almost mentioned it here. Everything we're talking about with this phased rollout is when it's going to go into DoD's contract requirements. And as Ken and Jeff were saying there, the prime contractors really can require whatever they want, though, right? And so we've already seen the market roll out, because there's pressure primarily from primes to say, hey, what are you doing? Are you implementing the proper controls? Are you under contract with the C3PAO? Do you have a plan to get certified? Whatever they're actually asking. What we're talking about here is the DoD's contract requirements, when there's, you're not going to get the award of that actual contract from the DoD or not. But we're already seeing sort of the market rollout for the reasons of the prime. And Lockheed Martin actually just sent out basically a statement where they publish and they've made it very clear, hey, this is what's coming. This is what we expect of all of you. And to your point, they have their own sort of vendor portal where they want everybody to make sure that they're sending in how compliant they are today.
Yeah, and in that same kind of thought, Matt, what are some common reasons that you see organizations are falling behind on this compliance journey? Is there anything that really sticks out to you from Align's perspective?
Any main reasons that they're falling behind?
Yeah.
I would say, kind of in line with this, either maybe not a good understanding as to like what's actually coming. So they've just been a little bit lackadaisical about it and kind of done what they've been doing for years and just feeling like, oh, we can just kind of self-attest, and whatever score we self-attest to is, whatever, right? We don't need a 110 out of 110. So I'd say maybe not knowing what's actually coming and how diligently and seriously they need to take it. I would say the other thing, again, it's interesting as a C3PAO, we get to intimately know them once they feel like they're ready, right? Hey, we're all ready for an assessment. Let's go in and get certified. And especially in the early days, we saw that be very hit or miss. Phase 1 of the CMMC assessment process does allow us some flexibility to come in and review documentation and basically say, hey, are we confident that you're, accessible and that this is going to be smooth, or that this is going to be a rough experience for you? So for a lot of clients in that phase 1, we caught a lot of things that we were like, hey, this is not going to go well, right? So you should go back and fix X, Y, or Z. And a lot of that did have to do with documentation and maybe not consistency across documentation, like some statements in certain parts of the system security plan not matching others, or not matching a certain policy and procedure. It's really like, say what you're doing and then prove you do what you say you're doing. That's really what it ultimately comes down to with the C3PAO assessment. And I would say also, a lot of organizations that try to go at this alone, we've seen that be the case where more often I would say they have some of those struggles, especially in phase one, to move through that assessment smoothly. So I think the biggest difference is if they get with an outside, reputable firm that knows this really well to actually help them to whatever degree they get that help, whether it's just some documentation help, full MSP support, anything in between. That has been a big differentiator in how prepared these clients have been for us.
Yeah, and certainly Ken and I have seen, from the Sikich seat anyway, clients who come in and say, yeah, we've got 110 score, we're good to go. And then we go and do our initial risk assessment and go through everything. And we find out they might have a 53 score, or,
Oh yeah,
much less
time.
than what they're attesting to, self-attesting.
Yeah.
So certainly good to get that third party in there to take a look at things for you.
Yeah.
So as we look at compliance as a competitive advantage and start thinking about that, Ken, you mentioned that forward-thinking organizations are kind of turning compliance into a differentiator. Can you share maybe a real-world example of this for us?
Yeah, and to kind of circle back to a webinar that I did last month, and if you're on here, and I would highly recommend looking it up on YouTube for the Sikich channel. I did a presentation, a webinar on transforming risk into opportunity, and there's a lot of good information there. And this is kind of coming from that presentation that I gave, but the reality is that in the kind of the world that we're in right now, being able to show again within the supply chain, within the DIB, your ability to handle the data, handle the information securely, boost three things that we look at. We call them the 3 R's. Really, your revenue, your resilience, and your reputation in the DIB. And as we saw through COVID and some of the other supply chain risk, resilience is a big thing, right? Your ability to meet your SLAs and fulfill contracts and complete projects, which all kind of, again, increases your revenue and your reputation. So a quick example here is, just an investment of $250,000 within next-gen firewalls and kind of security operation monitoring, log management, and then training your staff. Really, now you're able to bid on those RFPs, work with those prime contractors, right? Show that you whether you're a print shop or a manufacturer, now you're a secure print shop, now you're a secure manufacturer, now you're in that space where you can start bidding on these contracts faster, right? You can bid on RFPs because you're meeting the security questionnaires. And so really turning that investment and that risk, what's your go-to-market? We always say this, whether you get PCI certified or CMMC certified, now that you're certified, what's your go-to-market with that? Are you branding your website? Are you branding your materials that you're certified and you're compliant, right? All those things have good return on investment, and it's a business decision that, the business decision is not a waste of money. There is a return on that compliance. And so this is just a real world example here of that investment, how it increases revenue and that resilience of being down, and then your reputation. And we kind of look at those investing in compliance really increases those 3 R's.
Yeah, so as we think about CMMC specifically, Ken, maybe talking about how clients can take that CMMC readiness and turn it into a more broader strategic initiative or strategic advantage, like digital transformation or M&A readiness. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what we're seeing with CMMC, honestly, is it's forcing, the move to the cloud has been big, but there's, with manufacturers, there's a lot of on-prem, on CNC machines and those things. And a lot of the, suppliers in the DIB do need the on-prem infrastructure. But what we're seeing is now that CMMC is forcing them to build some kind of enclave, right? And it's forcing these, I wouldn't say forcing them, but it's giving them the opportunity to start thinking about the business transformation. Like, how are we going to handle data? How are we going to handle back-end processes? Like, we've had a lot of obsolete controllers and just, manufacturing equipment or logistics equipment and applications that have been around for a long time. And it's what we're seeing though is this investment is giving them more now of a competitive edge because they're able to provide, a better services, right? Not only that, one thing that I've kind of coined and been working on is the cyber debt line or cyber kind of we're looking at the budgets that these companies have had for cybersecurity and IT, and they really haven't had these budgets. And now this is kind of forcing business to look at increasing their budgets for cybersecurity. And what we're seeing is a lot of the smaller clients can't compete with the mid-sized to bigger clients. So there's going to be more merger acquisitions, more moving around to actually fulfill these government contracts. A lot of smaller companies that are maybe 4 or 5 people that are building some kind of RF antenna for a specific contract are going to, merge or partner with another company that's, building another piece of that specific contract and come together. And so the ability to basically kind of build these the infrastructure and put in these regulations and these controls makes you more marketable when it comes to merger acquisitions as well. So we've handled a lot of clients where 4 or 5 companies have come together and an investment firm has come in, and one of their main goals is to have them be ISO 27001 or CMMC compliant, so that the investment group, can use this as a tool to combined and sell off the companies. So there's a lot that's going there as well as we see this kind of movement in the DIB of smaller companies coming together and why compliance makes you more valuable in the space. Those are just some firsthand, merger acquisitions that we've been working on, and goals of the business has been one of the biggest things is becoming compliant in a framework to show that you're more marketable in the space.
Yeah, so as we kind of zero back in here on CMMC specifically, Ken, can you talk to us a little bit about Sikich's STARS program, that compliance readiness, kind of that example I gave of clients coming to us, at a 110 score, and then we come in and do some work and find out maybe they've got some things that they need to shore up before they go and talk to someone like Matt at Align.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullets on this page, but the theme of this webinar is accelerating time to compliance to CMMC. And we really feel like the STARS program does that. What we typically, and this is taking, the last 5 years of kind of development and working through companies meeting the NIST 800-171 controls, but then also prepping them for, CMMC. And we've learned from the timelines of our clients and how things progress, and the old school way of coming in and let's do the gap assessment and assessment right off the beginning, right? And that's what a lot of companies will come in and they'll sell and they'll say, hey, yeah, we'll do an assessment, see where you're at. Well, the reality is we know a lot of these clients, by doing those assessments, 4 or 5 years ago, we've come up with what's the common things that everybody's missing, right? And what we've done is flip the switch a little bit to say, let's work on those common things first before we come in and do the assessment. And this looks like a phased approach, but a lot of this is done streamlined all at once. And what we're saying here is as we go through the scoping, and that's the first phase of the STARS program, that's been the biggest challenge of all of our clients. What is CUI? Where do we have it? What are the assets that are in scope? What's the difference between a risk managed asset and a CUI asset and a security protection asset? And really taking a look at all their infrastructure, their assets that they have, and start classifying those, scoping out the network, and looking at how do we reduce the assets that are in scope, right? And working from that route and possibly building a dedicated enclave, or looking for a solution like GCC High or something like that, or Azure Gov, where we can move some of that CUI data. So we're already in the remediation phase up here in scoping because we're helping them figure out what their data flows are and start building out their processes. And the reality is, yes, a lot of companies have good documentation, or they'll have an information security policy that they feel is good documentation, but they're missing what's needed to build out the practices, those policies and standards. And so what we're doing right in the scoping phase is saying, let's set the governance, let's set what the policies and standards are going to be. And as we work through those, let's go ahead and do the assessment to see where your gaps are with these policies. So again, right in the scoping phase, we're already identifying gaps. We're already doing an assessment as we're scoping out the network, and we're building out the remediation efforts right in the scoping phase that we need to work on. And then we get into the training, and the training is super important, right? Like, so we're going through training today. Matt had a great overview of where we're at, right? And a lot of companies just don't understand what their CUI handling requirements are, what the timelines, what really is CMMC, and we're helping kind of, again, give our breadth of knowledge in the training. And the training's another thing that's done all the way through all the phases. We're training during the scoping phase, we're training how you're supposed to scope things and classify items. We're training how to build POAMs. We're training how to build the system security plan. So yes, it's a box here, but it's training through all the phases, right? We're sharing our subject matter expertise as we go through each kind of phase of this, or each approach. And then, we've, through the scoping and training, we've started populating the risk register and getting those things going. But now we need to kind of go through the formal risk register and see where we're at, and perform that as self-assessment and get that score up in the SPURS, or update the scores into the supplier risk database, right? So we do that self-assessment and kind of move that through. But it's been populated and worked on through the first two kind of phases as we go through. Once we get through that part, we're into the remediation, and really there we've started building out the POAMs and the plan of action and milestones. And as we're going through and helping this readiness program, we're building those POAMs out and putting those into a system security plan. And then at the end of that, having that full on system security plan. And this, as we're building the policies and standards and building the scoping document and doing the assessment, we're dynamically building the system security plan, which is one of the toughest things to build. If you think about it, we call it a one-sheeter for the whole program, but that one-sheeter could be 92 pages, right? I'm sure Matt's aware of that, going through the C3PAO, some of those system security plans. It's everything, right? It's the outline. And the way that we've structured our policies and standards, the way that we've structured our POAMs and our output, is structured to be able to dynamically update a system security plan. You're not rewriting that material to put it back into the system security plan. You're using the same material. So once you update one policy, you're updating the main program overview, that system security plan that everybody wants. The primes want that. The assessors want that. That's basically your kind of outline of what your program is. I mean, that's all the details. And then our model here is not just dropping off a PDF of a bunch of findings, right? Through risk assessments and our compliance programs, we know that if we come in and you do a risk assessment, right, a gap analysis right off the beginning, you drop off a PDF with a bunch of findings, maybe, Jeff might circle back 6 months later to say, hey, where are you guys at with this risk assessment report? And it's like, oh, it hasn't even left the folder yet, right? Like it's still there. We reviewed it and presented to management, but we don't know how we're going to address the issues yet. And the support phase is huge. So we're very proactive in making our clients, and working with them to say, let's set a cadence. Is it going to be weekly, bi-weekly? And it can't be quarterly. It just can't be, you can't come back and look at the POAMs in a quarterly fashion, because things don't get finished, and then it won't be till the second quarter to meet with them. Now we're 6 months in and we haven't made any progress on those POAMs. So we're real proactive on bi-weekly meetings, providing that support, that guidance, that advisory services, help building training materials and run books and playbooks, and getting those POAMs completed, so to meet those certification deadlines that you guys have. So all of this, what we saw by combining this together and doing a proactive kind of streamlined approach as we're scoping, writing, doing the assessment, building the POAMs. Every meeting, there's some kind of action items that come out of it that builds a remediation effort. we've saw that we reduced our clients' go-to-market and timelines by at least 3 months. Because what we saw was companies coming in, and when we originally did these 4 or 5 years ago, we would do an assessment. There would be, 50 some gaps or whatever, and we'd start building out poems. That would be another 2 months to build out those poems. And then we would start assigning those poems, and that would be another 2 months. And then people would start working on the policies and standards, and that would be another 3 months. And they would want to wait till those standards were approved. And we're 6 months, 8 months into the year, and we're just getting into kind of tackling, building the enclave and the remediation efforts. And we're here after every meeting. There's action items, there's follow-up, and we're tackling those poems from the start. And that's reduced clients by 3 to 4 months of time to compliance there.
Yeah, so Ken, as we think about the different types of clients that Sikich sees in these sort of engagements, we work with some that say, I think I have CUI. I'm not sure if I have CUI. Can you help me out with that? All the way up to those that may have already done an assessment entirely, gone through the whole process, have POAMs in place. How do you tailor the STARS program to those different companies when they're at different stages in that life cycle of getting things done?
Yeah, a lot of companies have paid, 150,000, 200,000. They already have a consultant come in and do and work on their networks for the last, 2 years to get them there. But it just hasn't been structured and organized in a spot where it's usable, right? And so as we go through this, yeah, they might have a lot of policies and standards built, but it's about taking those and organizing those into a functional documents, right, and functional practices. So a lot of ways that we've scaled this is that whether you're small or larger, is to come in, organize everything. Not only I don't want to call it check the box, but to make it more effective. And that's where our expertise is, right? So for smaller companies, it's actually building the practices. For larger companies, it's streamlining and making those practices more effective. And so we've been able to scale that to say, hey, look, let's take all your policies and then we'll use our templates, but we're going to use your language to populate our templates, right? So that's streamlined the process where we're not creating the standards from scratch, right? And so those are a lot of things. The self-assessment, the validation, the other things that we're able to do is come in and do the testing and the audit prep. So the nice thing about it is that if you've already gone through it, now and you think that you're there, okay, let's do the audit prep, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides here. Is all right, let's start gathering evidence that it's in place. And as we gather that evidence, then we were going to say, nah, this screenshot really doesn't cover this, or nah, look, you got a couple shared accounts. And as we take a look at this access control and start again organizing and preparing them for the actual certification. So that's the ways we've handled this, the building, the fact checking, and then the kind of like structuring to make sure that they're ready to go to their primes or the C3PAO.
Yeah, so before we move forward, could you kind of recap for us those most valuable deliverables that come from the STARS program that clients will get?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is the scoping, right? So the scoping document, the enclave, what's in scope, the data flows, which builds out the first half of the system security plan. The next piece is building the practices, the policies, the standards. Those are the key deliverables that auditors are going to look at. And then the overall risk register, that's what you're going to keep track of, what currently the risks that you have, your remediation efforts, and where you're currently at, and kind of that presentation to executive management or the board of, where we're currently at with CMMC. And then within the remediation there, again, what's your plans? What's the Q1, Q2, Q3, what does that look like? What efforts do we have in those? The plan of action milestones, your strategic roadmap there, and then the overall security, system security plan are just kind of the key deliverables. But once that's delivered, again, CMMC is not a one-time thing. So in that support phase, what you see is those compliance playbooks. It's a maintenance program. It really is an ongoing, I don't want to call it a lifestyle, but it is, right? So every 90 days, you got to do access review. Once a year, you got to do, security awareness training or an incident response testing. You got to review your firewall logs, right? So once this is in place and you're certified, having those playbooks of what you're going to do weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, is super important. And it's not over once you get the cert. It really is an every year self-assessment, every 3 years a recertification.
I like that, the CMMC lifestyle. You might be able to coin that and get that on LinkedIn and start something there. So you talked about those key deliverables that we have, and one of the other partnerships we have is with a company called ExoStar, which may be familiar to some folks here, but we use their GRC platform tool called Certification Assistant. And maybe, Ken, you could just give us a 30-second, 1-minute overview of kind of what we do with the CA tool and how that works with our STARS program.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. So obviously, as a risk manager, I've used a lot of GRC tools in the past, and it took a long time for Sikich to kind of land on one. There's, and we use multiples with our clients, and we're kind of vendor agnostic, really. But as a GRC or a risk manager, you kind of know there's a lot of prep and setup when you purchase a GRC tool. And the reason why we went with the ExoStar platform, it was built for CMMC. It's specifically the 800-171 controls. That's all it is. You're not going to have ISO or HIPAA or anything else in there, right? And so it gave us the ability throughout the STARS program to dynamically generate the system security plan. So as we're building those policies and standards and putting them into the CA platform and collecting the asset inventory, the output is you could say pretty, but the output is a nice structured system security plan, a dashboard to show management of where we're currently at, and just a spot to kind of keep everything and then generate the all-important system security plan that looks very systematic, and an auditor can go through, or management, or anybody can kind of pick out a control and see what's currently in place and what the POAMs are that we need to fix.
So as we think about partnerships, Matt, how does the partnership between Sikich's STARS readiness and Align's role as a C3PAO help kind of reduce that time and friction? Or maybe another way to say it would be the types of clients that you all see probably works out a little bit better if they've worked with someone like Sikich in a STARS program versus just coming to you and saying, hey, I'm ready for an audit. Here's all my stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, I kind of spoke on that briefly, and Ken was highlighting a lot of this as well, like how this can play hand in hand. I think the biggest thing is, in general, kind of to reiterate what I talked about before and what you just mentioned, Jeff, absolutely. Again, the biggest difference that we saw in sort of the divide between clients that were ready to pass through phase one and pretty smoothly move through the assessment, and those that we had some sort of red flags and we had to catch them and say, hey, we would recommend not going into phase two of the full assessment because it's probably not going to go well, has been whether they worked with a readiness partner or not, right? So, not saying you can't go at it alone. It is certainly possible, but just from our perspective, that is what we have seen so far. And then furthermore, yeah, I would say it can be important to understand which vendors you are working with and their potential familiarity with each other. Obviously, there's like a code of professional conduct, and there's no sliding anything under the table or anything. But I think it can be helpful for your readiness partner, your MSP, whoever you're working with, and your C3PAO to have an understanding of each other, especially when it comes down to things like shared responsibility matrices, the approach from the C3PAO, for instance. So like each C3PAO is going to have their own slightly different approach. We all do have to follow the CMMC assessment process, the CAP, that is the 4 phases of the actual assessment. But there's going to be some uniqueness in terms of what evidence is requested. How do the interviews go? Do they come on site or not? And I think it can be very helpful both ways, right? So for your C3PAO to have a good understanding as to your readiness partner, what they do, what type of documentation and what their approach is, if they have a shared responsibility matrix because they're like an MSP, like what does that look like? But then vice versa as well, I guess is my point. Is like, it's really good if you're working with a readiness partner for them to have a good understanding. Okay, this is the C3PAO's approach. This is when they're going to ask for what, the types of documentation they're going to ask for, and it just helps streamline that whole process, so that it's not you're working with one vendor and then it's like, oh, okay, they're asking for this. Okay, I wasn't expecting them to ask for this, right? And again, even though you can prove your compliance, there's different ways depending on the C3PAO that you might need to prove that. We have to follow examine, interview, test methodology. One C3PAO might interview to validate this assessment control. One might test, one might, examine and do like a live test. So I think, again, it can be really helpful in general, but especially when you just want to talk about like timelines, streamlining the processes, it can be really helpful to not run into any sort of delays and misunderstanding of each other.
Yeah, jump in real quick. I mean, one of the biggest things that we've seen, and again, I know that CMMC technically, is not in place, when it comes to the CFR 48, but there's a lot of companies that are getting assessed right now and getting their CMMC certifications, right? Being proactive. But not only that, through just other compliance, whether it's PCI, if anybody's aware of that, or high trust or anything that we've sat through MVCSOs, is knowing, okay, is getting those surprises that an auditor might see that, the client doesn't see, right? And we're kind of triaging those as we are helping them through the audit process, right? And so as we've been going through these CMMC assessments with C3PAOs, is kind of keeping a running log of things that the C3PAOs are catching and grabbing from our clients, and we're able to now build that into our frameworks, right? And the evidence and the screenshots. So having this partnership and understanding, again, is not going to get ethic codes or anything like that. It's this understanding and working through and streamlining the surprises to say, okay, yeah, we need to prep our clients for this, and because we know that's how the C3PAO is looking for. And just being through so many audits. I mean, I've been in the space for almost 30 years now, so the gotchas is what we're trying to reduce. But the gotchas are not checkboxes. They're legit, security flaws that need to be fixed, and we can help our clients kind of proactively work on those before they go for certifications. I think you hit a big thing there, like the shared responsibility matrix, Matt. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of when we come to technology, and I know we have their Sikich in that kind of box, but we work with other partners when it comes to technology. And that's the one thing that we've worked on the most, is the shared responsibility matrix. Like, it's just not normally in contracts. Like, who's handling incident response? Who's handling change management? Who's handling these controls that are part of 800-171? And what you're going to see going forward is everybody's going to have a shared responsibility matrix going forward. I just think it's going to be the norm for ESPs, what they call basically MSPs, MSSPs, right? To have clients are going to say, show me what controls you're covering for me. And that's just one thing by us partnering with different technology groups, and I don't think we have it on here, but we partner with ExoStar and Oracle and Microsoft, and Net Thunder is one of our companies and that we partner with. And as we're partnering with them, we're saying, all right, the first thing we're going to do is, what are you providing our clients? Like, what are the controls you're covering? And we're building that shared responsibility matrix, which goes into the policies and standards to say, okay, not only that, we take that shared responsibility matrix, and then in the policies and standards, we're saying, hey, Sikich is covering this control through our MSP. Sikich is covering this control. Oh, this one's your responsibility. And it outlines that in the standards and policies. So and then the C3PO can simply see, okay, I see this one you're partially responsible for, or you're fully responsible, or your third party is responsible. Are they certified, or what are they providing from a FedRAMP moderate? Or, it's easy to go through from a business standpoint to see who owns that control. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we've worked on, is and having this alignment in this ecosystem and building these partnerships, is being able to, again, not have surprises of who's the owner of that control. We've already hedged that as we move on to that kind of final certification process. Which comes into the next slide here. So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, Ken, I was just going to say, you kind of alluded to this a little bit when you were talking about the partnerships, but how does Sikich specifically use, automation and AI to speed up the readiness process for our clients?
Yeah, so we've been, self-validating our partners, right? And we've been, are they ready to go? And so as we do an assessment and the client has a gap, and we're able to say, well, here's a solution that's been through validation by us. Like, we've done our due diligence. These are the companies that are moving forward with CMMC. So the biggest thing that we saw probably, a year ago, 2 years ago, is big names that said, no, we're not going to play in the government space. But wait a second, we use you for threat monitoring, or we use you for log collection. Like, yeah, but we're not going CMMC route. We're not going to implement NIST controls. And so vetting out, have pre-vetting solutions and those and partners, and that's really going to accelerate that time to compliance, right? So you need that right now. One of the biggest thing is to look who your suppliers are, look who your vendors are, and if they're part of any kind of the data flow, the CUI, or part of the contract process, what is their plan for CMMC? And if they have no plans, unfortunately, you should probably shed that partnership and look for a company that has plans and wants to play in that space.
Yeah. So
So
oh, go ahead, Ken. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look here, what does that do? So it's going to reduce the time to compliance, because the data flow, the security, the encryption, everything's been validated. Everything meets the controls. The C3PAO can say, yeah, this is a FedRAMP moderate approved solution. We can move on, right? So that's one of the biggest things. They're pre-configured environments, right, that have already been through an assessment, been validated. Collaboration, integration, the ability to be able to share data right away. So what we're seeing is, as you move to the cloud, we're getting off of these, on-prem, whether it's FTP or some other kind of, I wouldn't say obsolete technology, but moving to a more collaborative, pre-approved, vetted supply chain type of products, right, that everybody is aware of. GCC High, Azure Gov, all these companies are working in these environments, and we can share across these environments. So, and then the ability to scale, right? So if we need to add new users or new CUI assets into the environments, that ability to bring those in and have them pre-configured and ready to go it's just, again, accelerating that time to compliance and building that. And then just the security and compliance, this having that evidence, being able to pull that. So a lot of these companies will have a body of evidence ready to go, and when an assessor comes in, they'll provide their vulnerability scans or their pen tests or their risk assessments, having that they're aware of that. So using technologies that are in the DIB and aware of their regulatory requirements, they're prepped and ready to go to provide the evidence to be able to fulfill those contracts and that. So all of that pre-prep work and validation obviously increases that time to compliance by selecting these types of vendors.
Yeah. So as we kind of bring everything back together from compliance, audit, technology, we're going to look at some of the top questions that we get from our clients as we're thinking about these issues. How long should organizations realistically expect that full CMMC readiness cycle to take? So as they're doing their strategic planning and saying we want to be CMMC ready for audit by X date, how long are they needing to take to get there?
Yeah, and it really comes down to the adoption of technology, right? If they go the route of adopting an environment that's already been validated and it's FedRAMP moderate and we're ready to go, you can drop that in and be ready to go within 1 to 2 quarters, right? But there's still that 3 to 6 months to build the practices, the policies, the standards around it. There's no CMMC in a box. A lot of companies will say a push button CMMC. Yeah, that's dropping in the technology. You know, and even a lot of our clients like ExoStar and NetThunder have a box or have a cloud solution that fulfills the technology piece, and that can be set up within 3 to 4 weeks, right? You're in there, you're already setting up accounts, but it's not building the practice. And that's really where clients or management struggles. They think that they're getting CMMC in a box and they're going to be done once the technology is implemented. But there's a lot of things. There's background checks and screening, and there's incident response training and IR builds, and a lot of practices that go around the management of that CMMC in a box that needs to be built. And so I don't want to give the false expectation that you're going to buy something, drop it in, and be done within 1 month to 2 months. The reality is to have that functioning and going is at least I would say a good 2 quarters if I want to be, if not 3 quarters of kind of getting to a spot where we say, hey, I think by the second quarter, we should be able to say, I think we're ready to schedule our C3PAO, right? Like policies are done, our practices are there. And it's the fortunate thing about CMMC and that's not like other regulatory requirements, like you don't need 1 year of evidence before you can go for certification. You can go for certification once it's established and set up. Where a lot of companies will say, no, you need like 1 year of logs, you need like 1 year of access review for evidence. But you do want that roll up to show that, yeah, the controls I have in place are effective. So, you gotta look at it. And what we're seeing right now from the industry and a lot of the big RFPs that are out there by the Army or any of these kind of DoD is they're not, they are requiring what is the date that you think you're going to be CMMC certified, and do you have a partnership with A-Line or another C3PAO at this time? Like, have you already established that the C3PAO relationship yet? Is it going to be Q1 of next year, or is it Q3 of this year? We want to know before, as you're bidding on this RFP, when is your plan to become CMMC certified?
Yeah, so I think one of these questions that I'm about to ask, I'll have Ken answer, and then maybe Matt, you could weigh in after Ken's done. But how can smaller defense suppliers with limited IT or compliance approach CMMC more strategically?
And it really comes down to your partnership with your MSP. So I just said that, right? A lot of these smaller clients are relying on their MSP to come in and build their assets, right? And so it's taking advantage of some of the, again, Microsoft GCC High 365 or an Azure type of gov or one of these partners that we have that are building these small business solutions. So ExoStar has like a shared, small business GCC High tenant. And really, again, vetting who your partners are and having a budget for if you're, again, looking for external sources, validating that they're going to be CMMC, and what's their approach to this. And again, unfortunately, this is going to be a thing where smaller companies just aren't going to be able to implement some of these controls. But you definitely can take a look at and work with a Sikich to help tighten and bring whatever infrastructure you have in. It again, the nice thing about CMMC, it's not about the whole infrastructure. It's about specific assets that are processing CUI. So if you're a small company and you only have 4 or 5 assets that have schematics on it or anything like that, then that's the scope, right? So it really is reducing that scope. A lot of companies think they need to, they're like, oh, we got to bring in we got to roll in the whole organization into this. No, that first phase of stars is how we help, right? Small companies is no. Oh, you have one person processing and building CAD drawings. All right, that's it. That how you get information into the asset, how you process and build those CAD drawings, and how you get information out of that asset. That's the scope. Let's tighten it up and let's build that scope. So scope reduction, using the policies and templates and the structure that we already have, help smaller companies reduce resources and time because they're not having to go out and recreate the wheel, right? They have the expertise from a A-Line or a Sikich to kind of come in and say, let's set them on the right path.
Yeah, and if you want to weigh in, Jeff, I would agree. I mean, the two big things I would say are number one, like Ken mentioned, like look at if an enclave is possible. You know, you'll generally hear all in or enclave, and that's basically what Ken just walked through. It's like, okay, is it possible based on the assets that this data is touching to just set up an enclave, a smaller scope, basically, and that can really minimize the cost, level of effort, all that sort of stuff. Just got to make sure that there's physical and logical separation there, and then access controls and all that. And that's what we'll really look for and check as a C3PAO. So that's the big thing. The other big thing I would say is, and this is kind of an overall theme of what we talked about, is like just do it right the first time. Because I think if organizations go through this, they work, whether that's with an outside firm or internally, they spend a lot of time, money, or just internal resources time going through this without being really confident that they're taking the right approach or doing this correctly. If you have to possibly go redo that work, that's where these costs really start to add up. And the worst case scenario is you find out that you have to do that rework because you went into a C3PAO assessment and you failed that assessment. Then you have to pay for that as well. So like, obviously that's like worst case scenario. I'm not trying to be too like fear mongery here and be like, oh, that's going to happen. That would be exceedingly rare. But I think those are the types of situations you want to try to avoid. Just try to do it right the first time, I think is the best way to overall mitigate costs.
Great. Great. And we have a question here in the Q&A, so I want to make sure we get to that before we wrap. But I think, Ken, probably it'd be best for you to answer this one. But the question is from Joe and says, which of your solutions, if any, do automated evidence collection? So that would be evidence collection for the assessment and pre-audit work.
Yeah, the reality is a lot of these that you're using in vetting, they'll have that body of evidence. So that's what we've been working through and what the C3PAOs are looking for right now when it comes to your partners or solution is, do they have a body of evidence? Like out of that shared responsibility matrix, do they already have the screenshots, the artifacts, everything that makes up their responsibilities? And so the automatic, a lot of these are not pulling specific like PowerShell scripts on access review or those types of things. There are some GRC tools and platforms that will go out and pull those. There are definitely some compliance managers within Microsoft, right, using Purview that we've helped clients set up Purview, and Purview will go out and look at CUI and be able to do automated data classification and discovery. And so those are some of the tools within Microsoft that you can use and we help you use for CUI discovery and management. And so again, it comes down to, as you're picking your partners, are they providing or giving you a monthly report of the controls they're responsible for? So any of the ESPs or cloud service providers that you're working with, you want to establish some kind of monthly or quarterly reporting that they're giving you those, the effectiveness of those controls. They're doing the vulnerability scans, they're doing the access review, whatever they're in charge of, you should establish some kind of cadence with them to provide a report on that automated collection from them. So they're handling that, right? And that offloads the resources onto your partnership with them. That's the automation that I've seen lately. When it comes to kind of making sure those controls are in place, is building that cadence of reporting with your partner.
Yeah, so as we kind of wrap things up here, we're getting toward the top of the hour, so we want to be mindful of everyone's time. But Matt, what's one piece of advice you'd give to an organization that's kind of just starting on that CMMC journey, that left-hand side of that first slide that we looked at today?
Yeah. Again, I'd say find the right partners, just do it right the first time. Put a lot of attention and detail into making sure you're partnering with who you feel confident is going to get you there with, meeting the requirements and timelines and everything that you're going to be looking for. Again, that's definitely the biggest thing. And we've talked about it a little bit. I didn't directly say it too much, but the C3PAO partnership, obviously very important. Obviously, I'm a little biased for a C3PAO, but you also want to vet, and I would say partner with, potentially even get under contract with your C3PAO as early in that process as possible. I think a lot of organizations, understandably, you're first thinking about control implementation, documentation, the readiness for the assessment, making sure you're going to score well and that you're actually compliant, you're doing the security posture. And then they just kind of push off the C3PAO portion. They're like, okay, I need to get certified later, so I'll do that portion later. C3PAO backlogs are filling. They're going to fill more and more, especially as the 48 CFR rule gets finalized. So the one thing I want to highlight here as we talk about organizations maybe earlier in the process is do not delay conversations with C3PAOs. Highly recommend, again, whoever you work with, obviously I would hope you work with Align, but whoever you work with, all C3PAOs have a backlog. So the worst case scenario, what you don't want to run into is you wait until you're near or at the end of your readiness, and then you're like, oh, I think we're going to be ready for an assessment soon. Let's pop up and start vetting C3PAOs. And then they're like, oh, we're booked out 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And that's not an exaggeration. Some of the smaller C3PAOs especially are booked out like 9 to 12 months already today. And so I think once 48 CFR rule, that's going to continue to grow. So I think a big potential business differentiator to be CMMC certified earlier, which we talked about a little bit, can create a little bit of a moat between you and your competitors. Because if you're able to bid on these DoD contracts because you're certified earlier and they're waiting on a C3PAO queue for 6 months, that's just a business advantage for you. So I would definitely look into C3PAO conversations early in the process as well.
Great. And Ken, for those that are already kind of in that process or journey, what's the most common pitfall they should watch out for?
I want to go back to what Matt said there. It's really about making sure they're with the right partner. The unfortunate thing about CMMC is it has generated and created a lot of pop-ups, right? Like you can go out, you can get certified, and you can start, doing your own contracting and being a CMMC expert. Really, if you look at Align or Align and Sikich together, right? The breadth of assessments that we've done over SOC 2 or PCI or HIPAA or HITRUST, other compliance, it's not a pop-up, right? Like we've gone through audits and we know the process and we know what, and security in general, pen testing and everything else that we do and building Azure Gov environments. And so picking the right partner that's been established in the industry, in the compliance, regulatory compliance industry, government industry is super important. And this the alignment that we have with Align and Sikich to say, hey, like they're the C3PAO. We know what the C3PAO is looking for. And going back to what we said before, knowing what the industry and the ecosystem, not just what we learned in the classes, but also, the partnerships that we have with everybody that's in the infrastructure. So I think that's the biggest pitfalls right now is kind of not vetting your current suppliers, like I said, and what's their roadmap to CMMC, and then also kind of validating who you're working with from a readiness and who's going to be your C3PAO, like Matt was saying, like establishing that and understanding their expectations. Those are some of the pitfalls that we've seen where clients have come in and thought that they were ready, but they just weren't ready yet for certification yet.
So to wrap things up for everyone this morning, thank you first to all of our attendees for joining us. Mike is going to put up a poll real quick for our attendees that are here. So if you just take a second to look at that, it's one question. Thanks also to Matt and Ken for sharing your expertise with us this morning. Certainly loved having you both here. As I said at the outset, if you don't follow Matt or Ken on LinkedIn, make sure you connect with them. Same with me. We're all posting a lot of content around CMMC and other compliances. So we hope that you walk away with some good tips and some things to think about accelerating your CMMC journey. And also, one of the things we like to do for anyone who joined us this morning is offer a free 30-minute strategic business overview. So my contact information is here, or you could reach out to any of us and we can help you get that started. But don't forget to do that if you're interested in talking further. So with all that being said, thanks again, gentlemen, and thank you to all of our attendees. Hope everyone has a great rest of the day.